They called me a gold digger. Until they saw my bank account, the accusation hit me like a slap across the face, delivered with such casual cruelty that I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I stood there in the middle of that upscale restaurant, my hand frozen mid-reach for my champagne glass, while my boyfriend's mother fixed me with those cold, calculating eyes that had clearly already made up their mind about me. "Only with my son for his money," she said, her voice carrying just enough for the nearby tables to hear. "We all know it. The question is, how much will it take for you to leave him alone?" I could feel the heat creeping up my neck, that familiar flush of humiliation that I'd grown accustomed to over the past 6 months. Around me, the other diners had gone suspiciously quiet, their forks paused mid-bite as they strained to catch every word of this unfolding drama. My boyfriend Marcus sat beside me, his jaw tight but his mouth stubbornly closed. He never defended me in these moments, he never could. "Mrs. Chen," I began, my voice remarkably steady despite the trembling in my hands, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There." She arched one perfectly sculpted eyebrow, her designer jewelry catching the restaurant's soft lighting. "My son tells me you work at a coffee shop. You live in a studio apartment in that part of town where the police helicopters circle at night. You drive a car that's older than my marriage, and yet somehow you manage to afford designer clothes and expensive dinners." I glanced down at my outfit, a simple black dress I'd bought on clearance, paired with a handbag I'd saved 3 months to purchase. The designer label was real, but I'd found it at a vintage store for a fraction of its original price. The irony wasn't lost on me that my attempts to fit into Marcus's world were exactly what made his mother suspicious. "Pay for my own things," I said quietly. "My clothes, my dinners, everything. With what? Tips from serving lattes?" The condescension dripped from every word and I felt something shift inside me. For months I'd bitten my tongue, smiled through the insults, tried to prove myself worthy of a family that had already decided I wasn't. But in that moment something snapped. "Actually," I said, reaching into my handbag, "I think it's time we clear something up." I pulled out my phone, my fingers moving with practiced ease as I navigated to my banking app. The restaurant had gone completely silent now, even the waitstaff hovering nearby, their professional detachment momentarily forgotten. I turned the screen toward Marcus's mother, letting the numbers speak for themselves. The color drained from her face so quickly I half expected her to faint. Is that real?" She whispered, her hand gripping the edge of the table. I watched her eyes scan the balance, watched her do the mental math, watched her entire worldview crumble in real time. 8 figures. Enough money to buy this restaurant, the building it was in, and probably the entire block. Money I'd earned myself, through years of hard work, sacrifice, and a ruthless determination that no one in this room could possibly understand. Marcus leaned over to see what had silenced his mother, and I watched his expression transform from confusion to shock to something that looked almost like fear. "I started my first business when I was 19, I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet restaurant. "A small online boutique that I ran from my dorm room. By 21, I'd sold it for enough money to put a down payment on a commercial property. By 23, I owned 3. By 25, I'd diversified into tech startups and real estate development. The coffee shop job, that's because I wanted to understand the service industry from the ground up. It keeps me grounded, reminds me where I came from." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. I didn't tell anyone about my finances because I wanted to be loved for who I am, not what I have. I wanted to find someone who saw me, not my bank balance. But it seems that no matter what I do, people will always reduce me to money. Either I'm a gold digger or I'm some kind of financial predator. There's no winning, is there, Mrs. Chen's lips moved but no sound came out. For the first time since I'd met her, she had nothing to say. Her carefully constructed narrative, the poor girl trying to trap her wealthy son, had crumbled to dust in front of her. "Marcus," I said, turning to face him, "did you know?" He couldn't meet my eyes. "I suspected," he mumbled. "The way you never let me pay for anything, the way you always seem to have money even when you claim to be broke. I didn't want to believe it." "Want to believe what?" "That I could be successful on my own, that I didn't need your family's money." He flinched and I felt a pang of something, not quite sympathy, not quite pity. Marcus had been the first man who'd made me feel seen, who'd looked past my careful disguises and seemed to appreciate the real me. But in the end, he'd been just as shallow as everyone else, just in a different way. "Need some air," I said, standing up and grabbing my bag. I walked out of the restaurant with my head held high, ignoring the whispers that followed me. Outside, the city night air hit my face, cool and refreshing after the cloying atmosphere inside. I leaned against the building's facade, closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The truth was, I'd known this moment would come eventually. I just hoped it would be on my terms. 6 months earlier, I'd met Marcus at a charity gala I'd attended as a donor. I'd been wearing my carefully curated normal girl outfit, my hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, no designer labels in sight. He'd approached me at the bar, charming and handsome, and we'd hit it off immediately. For the first time in years, I'd felt like someone was interested in me, not my money, but the longer we dated, the more complicated things became. His family was old money, the kind of wealth that came with centuries of privilege and a rigid social hierarchy. I was an outsider, and no amount of money, even if they'd known about it, would have changed that. They didn't care about wealth, they cared about bloodlines, about legacy, about the right schools and the right connections. And I'd made the mistake of falling in love with a man who couldn't stand up to his mother. My phone buzzed and I glanced down to see a message from Marcus. "Can we talk? Please, I know my mother was out of line. She had no right to speak to you that way." I stared at the screen for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to go back inside, to demand an apology, to prove that I was more than just the numbers in my bank account. But another part of me, the part that had been bruised and battered by a lifetime of judgment, knew that I deserved better. I typed out a response with more care than I'd intended. "I think we need some time apart. Your mother's behavior was unacceptable, but so was your silence. I can't be with someone who won't stand up for me. I'm sorry." I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then shoved the phone back in my bag. The night air felt strangely liberating, as if I'd shed a weight I hadn't even known I was carrying. Looking back, I realized that the restaurant confrontation was just the beginning. In the weeks that followed, my life became a whirlwind of gossip, judgment, and unexpected revelations. Marcus's mother, it turned out, had been spreading rumors about me throughout their social circle for months, and when the truth came out, it sparked a firestorm of reactions. Some people couldn't believe that a woman as wealthy as I was would stoop to working in a coffee shop, as if my financial independence somehow disqualified me from understanding the common worker's experience. Others were fascinated by my story, drawn to the rags to riches narrative of a woman who'd built her fortune from nothing. And a few, the ones who mattered most, simply shrugged and said they'd known all along that there was more to me than met the eye. Marcus called me repeatedly over the next few days, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic to desperate. He told me he'd confronted his mother, that he'd finally seen how toxic her behavior was, that he wanted to make things right. But it was too little, too late. The damage had been done. I started spending more time at my properties, the buildings I'd acquired through years of careful investment and renovation. My penthouse apartment overlooked the city skyline, a space I'd designed myself from the ground up, filled with art and furniture that reflected my journey. It was my sanctuary, the only place where I could truly be myself, and yet even there I felt the weight of people's expectations pressing down on me. I'd built my fortune through hard work and determination, but I'd also been lucky. I'd been in the right place at the right time, had the right ideas, and had taken risks that had paid off. I knew that not everyone had those opportunities, and I'd tried to use my wealth to create opportunities for others. The coffee shop wasn't just a hobby, it was a social experiment. I'd invested in it because I wanted to understand the challenges faced by service workers, to see firsthand the struggles that so many people faced. I'd worked alongside my employees, learned their names and their stories, and used what I'd learned to inform my philanthropic efforts, but no one wanted to hear about that. They were too busy dissecting my net worth, trying to figure out if my success was legitimate or if I'd somehow cheated the system. Women in particular seemed to struggle with my story, as if my financial independence threatened their own carefully constructed identities. One evening, about a month after the restaurant incident, I received an unexpected visitor. My sister Lily showed up at my door with a bottle of wine and a determined expression. "Been hiding," she said, pushing past me into the apartment. "The tabloids have been going crazy trying to find you." I sighed, closing the door behind her. "Let them look. I'm not interested in being famous." "Late for that, sis." She flopped onto my sofa, kicking off her shoes with the casual abandon that only a sister could get away with. "You're all over the internet. Mystery millionaire exposed, coffee shop heiress, the real gold digger is actually the gold mine. It's insane." I winced. "That's exactly what I was trying to avoid." "You thought dating a wealthy socialite would help?" She shook her head. "Honey, you're not exactly subtle." We drank wine and talked late into the night, the way we used to before my life got complicated. Lily had always been my anchor, the one person who knew the real me, the girl who'd grown up in a modest house with parents who'd struggled to make ends meet. She remembered the early days of my first business, when I'd slept on a mattress on the floor and eaten ramen noodles for weeks on end. Remember when we used to dream about this, she said, gesturing around the penthouse. Having enough money to never worry again. Of course I remember. I also remember thinking that money would make everything perfect. I considered the question carefully. The truth was, money had solved a lot of problems, but it had created just as many. It had made me cautious, suspicious, always wondering if people liked me for myself or for my bank account. It had created distance between me and the people I loved, even when I tried to bridge that gap with generosity. No, I admitted, it didn't make everything perfect, it just made my problems more expensive. Lily laughed, but there was a sadness in her eyes. I'm sorry about Marcus, I know you really cared about him. I did, but I don't think I ever really knew him, or maybe I knew him too well and didn't want to admit what I was seeing. Loss, Lily said firmly. You're amazing with or without the money, and anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve you. I hugged her, grateful for her unwavering support. It was easy to forget, in the midst of all the gossip and judgment, that there were people who loved me unconditionally. People who'd known me before I had a dime to my name and would love me just as much if I lost everything tomorrow. Over the next few months, I gradually re-emerged into the world, but on my own terms. I stopped trying to hide my wealth, but I also stopped trying to prove myself. If people wanted to judge me, that was their problem, not mine. I continued working at the coffee shop, but I also became more open about my other ventures. I started speaking at business conferences, sharing my story with other women who were trying to break into male-dominated industries. I expanded my philanthropic efforts, focusing on organizations that supported women entrepreneurs and disadvantaged youth, and slowly but surely, the narrative shifted. The gold digger label faded away, replaced by stories about a woman who'd built her fortune from scratch and used it to help others. The media still had their sensationalized headlines, but the tone changed from suspicion to admiration. I didn't care about any of that. What mattered to me was the sense of freedom I'd finally achieved. For years, I'd been trapped by my own secret, afraid to let anyone see the real me. I thought that hiding my success would protect me, would keep me safe from judgment and jealousy, but all it had done was create more distance, more isolation. By trying to be someone I wasn't, I'd ended up alone anyway. Marcus reached out to me again about 6 months after our breakup. He'd started therapy, he said, and he'd realized how much he'd failed me. He'd finally stood up to his mother, told her that her behavior was unacceptable, and set boundaries that had been long overdue. I'm not asking you to take me back, he said, his voice earnest over the phone. I just want you to know that I see you now, really see you, and I'm sorry I didn't see you before. I thought about his words for a long time. Part of me still cared about him, still remembered the connection we'd shared in those early days, but I'd also learned an important lesson about love and respect. I'm glad you're working on yourself, I said finally. I hope you find what you're looking for, but I can't be part of that journey. He was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the disappointment in his voice when he finally spoke. I understand, I wanted you to know that you were right about everything. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. That means a lot. We ended the call with a sense of closure that had been missing from our relationship. I didn't love him anymore, but I'd stopped resenting him too. He was just a person doing his best with the tools he had. We'd both made mistakes, and we'd both learned from them. I was ready to move on. My life today looks very different from what I imagined it would be. I still run my businesses, still work at the coffee shop a few days a week, still give my time and money to causes I believe in. But I've also made space for myself, for the things that bring me joy outside of work and philanthropy. I travel not to the exclusive resorts that people expect, but to places that challenge me, that remind me of how big the world is and how small my problems are. I've started painting again, something I haven't done since college, and I've found a community of friends who love me for who I am, not what I have. I've also started dating again, more cautiously this time. I don't hide my success, but I also don't lead with it. I want someone who sees me, all of me, and chooses to stay because of who I am, not in spite of it. The gold digger accusations still sting sometimes, I won't lie. There are always going to be people who can't imagine a woman being successful on her own terms, who reduce every achievement to some hidden agenda. But I've learned that their judgment says more about them than it does about me. The truth is, I am a gold digger, just not in the way they meant. I dig for gold in myself, in my potential, in the possibilities that exist in every moment. I dig for gold in other people, too, in their stories and their struggles and their strengths. I dig for gold in the world, in the beauty and complexity that so often go unnoticed. And that's the real treasure, the one that can't be measured in dollars and cents. That's what I was protecting all along, the part of myself that I'd built long before the money started flowing. The girl who dreamed big and worked hard and refused to let anyone tell her she wasn't enough. She's still here, still digging, still finding gold in unexpected places. And she always will be, so yes, they called me a gold digger. They whispered behind my back, made assumptions about my motives, judged me without knowing the first thing about my journey. But when they saw my bank account, when they saw the proof of my success, their narrative fell apart. Because the truth is, I was never digging for their gold. I was digging for my own, and I'd already found it.